let's get into style analysis. Now, the first thing you want to do, of course, is read the prompt. And the prompt is going to direct your analysis towards a particular goal. Is it just asking you to focus on choices that allow the speaker to persuade? Is it asking you to focus on the strategies that allow the speaker to characterize a situation or a topic? Is it asking you to focus on the strategies or choices that allow the speaker to build their ethos? Is it asking you to focus on the strategies that's somehow evoking a particular emotion in the audience, right? Now, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be down here at the bottom, the thing that's just been underlined. It's going to tell you write an essay that does X, Y, and Z. And rhetorical strategies are really rhetorical choices based off of how we're teaching it in the class. And then what you're going to do is you are going to look at the rest of the prompt, and it'll often give you just enough information to start mapping out the rhetorical situation. So I always recommend drawing that triangle on a blank sheet of paper, figure out everything you can about the speaker, everything you can about the audience, and everything you can about either the claim or the purpose that they're going for. Now, sometimes it's not going to give you all of that in the prompt. Usually the prompt will be helpful. Sometimes you actually have to read the text at least once or twice in order to get a better map of the rhetorical situation. And if you think you can manage it, right, after that, while you're reading for initial understanding, you can also start annotating for rhetorical choices. I don't recommend that if you're not very comfortable with identifying rhetorical choices yet, but if you are, you can do double duty. I always recommend doing one thing at a time, but if you can do it, go for it. My recommendation, read once to understand the situation and to complete the map, and then read again, scan or skim for rhetorical choices. And in the class, the easiest rhetorical choices to find are typically the modes. That's what the textbook, covers, all the little rhetorical modes such as description, example, yada, yada, yada. And then less, less intense, but just as important, detail selection, diction, syntax, and any figurative or literary devices such as metaphor, irony, personification, that kind of stuff. That stuff are also choices made by the writer. Now, once you've mapped out the situation and you've figured out some choices, you want to select choices that are relevant to the actual situation. So you don't, just because you can identify a metaphor, but you don't know what effect it's producing that's relevant for the situation, probably not worth talking about. Same thing with an anecdote. If you've identified an anecdote, but you can't really explain how it's useful for answering the prompt or what kind of effect it's having on the audience, probably not worth talking about, okay? Only choose to talk about the things that you can relate to the situation and to how it might be a strategy that's going to help them persuade, okay? So it's generally better to pick a strategy that shows up more than once, right? Therefore, it's an actual strategy and not just a momentary tactic. But if you're desperate, yeah, do that. Focus on single instances. But if you notice that they're doing a lot of comparing and contrasting, and it's like half of the entire text is just a lot of compare and contrast, that's probably something that you want to focus on, right? If you see a lot of really vivid description on how they're characterizing a particular, object, focus on that, right? If it shows up a lot, it's probably worth talking about. So you generally want to look for choices that show up a lot in here. You want to aim for about 2 or 3, right, that you can talk about. 3 or 4, actually, not 2 or 3. And then you want to make sure that not that you can just identify them, but you can explain how they're going to make the speaker more persuasive or whatever the prompt is asking you to focus on. And then what you're going to do affects language is different from choice language, right? You want to think about the language that we discussed in class and the resources I gave you, right? If you describe something a certain way or compare something in a certain way or contrast it or classify it or define it in a particular way, you can take that object or you can take that concept or that person or that thing and you can lift it up and make it look better or lower it and make it look worse, right? You can make it seem more familiar or less familiar. You can make it seem bigger than it is or smaller than it is. You can take 2 things and connect it, or take something and break it apart and disconnect it from the connotations or thoughts we often have with it or the associations, or you can amplify the intensity of something or you can diminish something. And again, you want to tailor your language to make it match the situation and make it match the topics that are being discussed, okay? And then once you've decided which strategies, or sorry, rhetorical choices you want to focus on, you're going to think, well, what are my body paragraphs going to look like, right? What are you going to talk about? What quotations are you going to use? And then are you able to explain how it's relevant for the rhetorical situation and whatever the prompt is asking for? Once you have 3 or 4 of that, in your outline, then you're ready to actually write your thesis, refer back to the thesis structures that we covered in class, and then that's pretty much it. You don't need to worry about an intro. You don't need to worry about a conclusion. Just start with a thesis, hit me with those body paragraphs, and then just repeat the thesis to let the grader know that you're pretty much done. Okay, and that is style analysis process in a nutshell. Again, we spent a couple other units talking about all the minutia of this. You've seen other lectures focusing on choices. You've looked at other lectures focusing on effects. You looked at other lectures focusing on rhetorical situations. This is just an overview, okay? And if you don't understand a particular part of this process, go back to the old lectures and check and make sure you understand what's going on. Otherwise, just ask me in class. Make good choices. High five for learning.